Hi there, welcome to Fantasy Hub. I'm Mia, your storyteller. Today's story is filled with heartache, discovery, and a twist you won't see coming. So let's begin.
My hands were calloused, my back screamed every morning, and my bank account? Let's just say it had more cobwebs than a haunted house. The hospital bills kept arriving like unwelcome guests, $45,000 in total. Might as well have been $1 million. For all the good it did me, Mom needed surgery. Not the kind you can put off, not the kind where you get a second opinion and hope it goes away. The real deal. Life or death, mortgage dash the dash house dash if dash she had one kind of surgery. And there I was, 26 years old, working 3 jobs that barely covered rent, watching the woman who taught me that dandelions were just wishes waiting to happen slowly fade away. That's when desperation whispered its sweet, poisonous idea. In my ear, I stared at my phone one night, scrolling through Instagram, watching these perfect women with their perfect lives rake in thousands for a single post. Their gardens weren't even that impressive. Half of them probably had gardeners anyway. But there they were, draped in silk, strategically positioned among roses and hydrangeas, collecting money like it was falling from trees. That's the moment Garden Goddess was born. The preparation took weeks. I studied angles, lighting, photo editing apps that could transform my tired face into something marketable. I borrowed a friend's DSLR camera, telling her I wanted to document my gardening journey. Technically not a lie, right? I chose the name carefully. Garden Goddess had mystique, implied both beauty and knowledge. I crafted a backstory born and raised on a flower farm in Oregon, studied horticulture at a prestigious university I'd never even visited, traveled the world collecting rare seeds and ancient gardening wisdom. The photos were the hardest part. Standing in public parks at sunrise, wearing silk scarves and lace lingerie under strategically placed leaves, praying no one would recognize me. My hands shook so badly during the first shoot that half the pictures were blurry. But slowly, I found my rhythm. I learned which angles made my curves look deliberate rather than desperate. How morning light could make even my apartment's fire escape look romantic when draped with dollar store fairy lights and plastic ivy. The first post got 37 likes, the second 62. By the end of the month, Garden Goddess had 5,000 followers and her first sponsorship deal $200 for promoting an organic fertilizer company. I cried when that payment hit my account. Not from shame, though that was there too, but from pure relief. For the first time in months, I could buy groceries without counting every dollar. The comments poured in. You're absolutely stunning. Teach me your secrets. I'd let you plant anything in my garden. Beautiful. I learned to craft responses that were flirty but mysterious, knowledgeable but accessible. Garden Goddess was everything Marina wasn't: confident, sensual, successful. Within 3 months, I was making more as Garden Goddess than I'd ever made in my real life. Sponsorships from seed companies, garden tool manufacturers, even luxury. Skincare brands that claimed their products gave that natural glow. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was literally selling a fantasy while my actual life was falling apart. But Mom's surgery was scheduled. The down payment was covered. For the first time since the diagnosis, I could breathe. That's when Julie Sanders entered my life. The message came through my real Instagram account, the one with 43 followers and pictures of my actual garden. A scraggly collection of tomatoes and herbs growing in containers on my fire escape. Someone had recommended me for gardening. Position at the Sanders estate. I should have been suspicious. My legitimate gardening credentials were thin at best community college. Horticulture classes and a weekend job at a nursery hardly qualified me for estate work. But desperation makes you brave, and I needed every legitimate income stream I could get. The Sanders estate sprawled across 20 acres of Connecticut countryside. The kind of place you see in movies about rich people with dark secrets. The main house was a Georgian colonial that probably cost more than most people make in a lifetime, and the gardens. God, the gardens were magnificent. Formal hedge mazes, rose gardens that looked like they belonged in Versailles, and a greenhouse that was larger than my entire apartment building. Julie met me at the front door. I'd looked her up, of course. 32, recently divorced from tech mogul Richard Sanders, active in charity work, frequently photographed at galas and art openings. The photos didn't do her justice. She was taller than me in flats, with sharp cheekbones and dark hair pulled back in a way that said she was serious about everything. Her eyes were the color of expensive whiskey, and they seemed to see right through every lie I'd ever told. "You come highly recommended," she said, leading me through halls lined with art I recognized from museum visits. "But I have particular standards." My mouth went dry. "I understand." "The previous gardener lasted 3 weeks, the one before that a month." She paused by a window overlooking the rose garden. "They seemed to think this was just about making things pretty. I need someone who understands that gardens are living systems. Every plant, every bloom, every fallen leaf affects the whole." I nodded, trying to look confident while internally panicking. "I believe in working with nature, not against it." She turned to study me, and I felt like a specimen under a microscope. "We'll start with a trial period, 2 weeks. If your work meets my expectations, we'll discuss a permanent arrangement." The salary she quoted was more than I made in 2 months at my other jobs combined. "I'll exceed your expectations," I promised. What I didn't mention was that I'd been following her personal Instagram account for months through my garden goddess profile. I'd liked her posts about her morning runs, her book recommendations, even a picture of her cat sleeping in a patch of sunlight. She was funny, intelligent, and she posted these random thoughts about life that made her seem almost approachable. The irony was overwhelming. Here I was, standing in her foyer wearing clearance rack clothes and bargain shoes, while my fake persona had been digitally stalking her from the comfort of my crappy apartment. The first week was torture. Julie seemed to appear everywhere I worked, silently observing while I pruned roses or weeded the herb garden. She never criticized, but she never praised either. Just watched with those sharp eyes, occasionally making notes in a leather journal. I threw myself into the work with desperate intensity. I researched every plant in her gardens, learning their Latin names, their care requirements, their seasonal patterns. I arrived early and stayed late, determined to prove I belonged there. But it was the small moments that undid me. Like when she brought me lemonade on the 3rd day, her fingers brushing mine as she handed me the glass. "You're working too hard," she said softly. "The gardens will still be here tomorrow." Or when I found her in the greenhouse on Friday evening, sitting among the orchids with her laptop, working by the golden hour light filtering through the glass. "It's peaceful here," she explained without looking up. My ex-husband never understood why I spent so much time in the gardens. He thought they were just for show. I should have said something professional, something about the therapeutic qualities of gardening. Instead, I heard myself say, "Some people see gardens as decoration. Others see them as sanctuaries." She looked up then, really looked at me, and smiled for the first time since I'd started working for her. Exactly. The nights were the hardest part. I'd returned to my apartment exhausted from physical labor, only to transform into garden goddess for my evening posts. The contrast was jarring, spending my days in honest dirt, my nights crafting digital fantasies. But the followers kept growing and the money kept flowing. I was up to 15,000 followers with sponsorship deals that paid more than most. People's monthly salaries. I told myself it was temporary, just until mom was healthy and my debts were paid. I didn't let myself think about what would happen when those two worlds collided. The second week, something shifted. Julie started lingering longer during her observations, asking questions about my techniques, my plant choices, my philosophy on garden design. She had opinions, strong ones, and we found ourselves in spirited discussions about companion planting and soil composition that stretched long past my scheduled hours. "You're not like the others," she said on Tuesday, watching me carefully stake a climbing rose that had been damaged in a storm. "You actually care about the plants, not just the paycheck." If only she knew how desperately I needed that paycheck. "Gardens are relationships," I said, testing the ties to make sure they wouldn't cut into the stems as the plant grew. "You can't fake caring about something that's alive." She was quiet for a long moment. "No, I suppose you can't." Wednesday brought rain, and Julie insisted I work in the greenhouse instead of going home early. We spent the afternoon repotting orchids, working in comfortable silence, punctuated by her occasional instructions or my questions about her collection. "This one's my favorite," she said, indicating a white orchid with purple spotted petals. "It took 3 years to bloom after I got it. Everyone said I should give up on it. But you didn't." "Patience is rewarded in gardens," she said, then looked at me sideways. "And sometimes in life." I felt heat creep up my neck and focused intently on the potting soil. Thursday, she brought lunch to the garden, fancy sandwiches from somewhere in town. Fresh fruit, sparkling water in glass bottles. We ate sitting on a stone bench overlooking the formal gardens, talking about everything except the obvious tension building between us. "Tell me about your family," she said, and I found myself sharing real stories for the first time in months. About mom's illness, about growing up poor but happy, about learning to garden from seeds she saved in mason jars and soil she mixed in old coffee cans. "She sounds wonderful," Julie said softly. "She is. She's everything I'm not, kind, genuine, honest to a fault." Julie studied my face. "I think you're selling yourself short." If only she knew Friday brought the storm literally and figuratively. The weather forecast had called for light rain, but by afternoon, the sky had turned an ominous green-black and the wind was whipping through the trees with increasing fury. I was working in the far gardens when the first drops fell, racing to secure plant supports and collect tools before the deluge hit. By the time I reached the main house, I was soaked through, and the storm was in full fury. Lightning split the sky, followed immediately by thunder that shook the windows. "You can't drive in this," Julie said, appearing at the door with a towel. Before I could even knock, "The roads will flood, and some of those trees look ready to come down." I protested weakly, but she was right. The rain was coming down in sheets, and my ancient Honda wasn't exactly built for extreme weather. "The guest room is yours," she said, leading me through the house. "I'll have some dry clothes sent up." The guest room was larger than my entire apartment, with windows overlooking the gardens and a fireplace that Julie had somehow already lit. The dry clothes turned out to be her own soft yoga pants and a cashmere sweater that smelled like her perfume. We had dinner by the fire, the storm raging outside while we talked about books, travel, dreams we'd had as children. Julie made pasta from scratch, opening a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I wanted to be a landscape architect, I admitted after my second glass of wine. I had all these plans for sustainable garden designs, urban food forests, healing gardens for hospitals. What happened? Life, bills, reality. I laughed, but it came out bitter. Turns out dreams don't pay for medical emergencies. "I'm sorry about your mother," Julie said quietly. "Health scares are terrifying. When my father had his heart attack, Last year, I felt so helpless. All the money in the world couldn't guarantee the surgery would work. We talked until well past midnight, the conversation flowing as smoothly as the wine. I found myself forgetting to be careful, to maintain the professional distance I'd been so careful to preserve. That's when her phone buzzed. A notification lit up the screen, and I saw it before she did a familiar image, a post from Garden. Goddess that had been automatically shared to her story by some algorithm I didn't understand. My blood turned to ice. Julie glanced at her phone, then did a double take. Her expression shifted from relaxed contentment to sharp focus in seconds. She picked up the phone, studying the image me, draped in silk scarves among artificial flowers, selling some botanical skincare product with a sultry smile and a caption about natural beauty. Then she looked at me, really looked. This is you. It wasn't a question. It was a statement delivered with the certainty of someone who just solved a puzzle they'd been working on for weeks. My heart hammered against my ribs. I can explain. Garden Goddess. She set the phone down carefully, like it might explode. 15,000 followers. Sponsored posts for luxury beauty products and high-end garden supplies. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the expensive upholstery and never face this moment. Julie, how long? 6 months? The words came out as a whisper. 6 months. She stood up, pacing to the window where lightning still flickered across the sky. You've been living a double life for 6 months? I needed the money. The explanation sounded pathetic even to me. My mom's surgery, the bills. I was desperate. She turned back to me, and I braced for anger, disgust, disappointment. All the reactions I deserved. Instead, she asked, and now? Now? Are you still desperate? She moved closer, and I could see something shifting in her expression, something I couldn't quite read. Or did you keep going because you liked it? I opened my mouth to deny it, to explain that it was purely transactional, purely survival. But sitting there in her clothes, in her house, having shared wine and stories and laughter, I couldn't lie anymore. I don't know, I admitted. At first, it was just about the money, but then people looked at Garden Goddess like she was special, desirable, worth something, and Marina is tired and scared and never enough for anything. Julie sat down beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. The woman who's transformed my gardens in 2 weeks, who speaks 3 languages to my plants and noticed that the clematis was getting too much afternoon sun. That woman isn't enough. Tears stung my eyes. That's not how the world sees me. How do you think I see you? The question hung in the air between us, charged with possibility and danger. I looked at her, really looked, and saw something in her expression that made my breath catch. I don't know. She reached out, brushing a tear from my cheek with her thumb. I see someone who cares so deeply about living things that she works herself to exhaustion. Someone who's willing to sacrifice her pride for her family. Someone who creates beauty wherever she goes, whether she's being paid for it or not. Julie, I've been following Garden Goddess for months, she said softly. I liked her posts, admired her garden tips, even bought some of the products she recommended. But I hired Marina. I've been watching Marina work in my gardens, watching her coax life from difficult soil, watching her treat every plant like it matters. My heart was racing so fast I was surprised she couldn't hear it. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've been falling for both versions of you, and now I understand why. She leaned closer, close enough that I could count the gold flecks in her brown eyes. Garden Goddess is beautiful, mysterious, confident, but Marina is real. The kiss happened so fast I almost missed it, a gentle brush of lips that sent electricity shooting through my entire body. When she pulled back, we were both breathing hard. This is insane, I whispered. Probably, She agreed, then kissed me again, deeper this time, her hands tangling in my hair. When we finally broke apart, the storm outside seemed like nothing compared to the chaos in my chest. What happens now? I asked. Julie smiled, the first completely unguarded expression I'd seen from her. Now we figure it out together. I should have known it couldn't last. For 3 weeks, we existed in a perfect bubble. I continued working in Julie's gardens during the day, and we spent evenings talking, cooking together, exploring this impossible connection that had developed between us. She never asked me to stop being garden goddess, and I didn't offer to quit. The money was still too important, and honestly, I was starting to enjoy the confidence that came with it. Julie even helped sometimes, suggesting locations on the estate. For photo shoots, letting me use her greenhouse for some particularly artistic shots. She had an eye for composition that transformed my amateur attempts into something approaching professional quality. "You're talented at this," she said one evening, reviewing the day's photos on my laptop. "Have you thought about transitioning to legitimate modeling? Or maybe starting your own gardening brand under your real name?" I have thought about it, actually, but Marina Flores from Queens didn't have the same ring as Garden Goddess, and I was terrified of losing the mystique that made the whole thing work. That fear turned out to be prophetic. It started small, a comment on one of my posts from someone claiming to recognize me from the Sanders place. I deleted it quickly, blocked the user, tried to pretend it never happened. But screenshots, live forever on the internet, and within hours, the speculation had spread to gossip forums and local Facebook groups. By morning, the story had been picked up by a blogger who specialized in influencer fraud. The headline made my stomach turn. "Garden Goddess exposed. Real identity of Instagram star revealed." The post was devastating in its thoroughness. They'd found my real name, my address, photos of me from high school, employment records showing my various minimum wage jobs. They'd even tracked down neighbors who confirmed that I lived in a modest Queens apartment with no visible garden space. The comments were brutal. Another fake influencer selling lies. I bought those expensive plant foods because I trusted her. Expertise. She's just a poor girl pretending to be rich. But the worst part was what it meant for Julie. The Sanders family was old Connecticut money. The kind of family that appeared in society pages and donated wings to hospitals. Julie's divorce had already been messy and public, and now she was being linked to Instagram fraudster Marina Flores by photographers who had apparently been watching the estate. Her phone started ringing at dawn reporters, family members, concerned friends who'd seen the story trending on social media. I watched her field call after call, her expression growing more guarded with each conversation. "Maybe I should go," I said after she hung up on her mother for the 3rd time. "Don't," she said firmly. "Don't let them chase you away." But I could see the strain in her eyes, the way she kept checking her phone as the story gained momentum. Online. By afternoon, there were photographers at the estate gates, and Julie's mother had issued an ultimatum: end things with me or face being cut off from the family trust that funded her charitable work. "This will blow over," Julie insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. It didn't blow over. It got worse. The sponsors fled first every company that had paid. Garden Goddess for endorsements suddenly wanted nothing to do with the fraudulent account. My follower count plummeted as people realized they'd been deceived by my fake lifestyle. The few supporters I had were drowned out by the angry mob demanding refunds and apologies. Within a week, I'd lost everything I built as Garden Goddess. The income that had paid for Mom's surgery, the confidence I'd carefully cultivated, the identity that had made me feel valuable gone. The confrontation with Julie's family was everything I'd expected and worse. Her mother, Patricia Sanders, Was everything Julie wasn't cold, judgmental, perfectly coiffed even in her righteous anger. She spoke to me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe, then spent an hour explaining to Julie exactly how this association would ruin her reputation and destroy decades of family standing in the community. Julie listened patiently, then stood up and said, "Mother, I love you, but Marina stays. If you can't accept that, you're welcome to leave." Patricia left, but not before delivering one final ultimatum. Choose her, and you choose to be cut off from this family forever. Julie's response was to take my hand and squeeze it tight. The next few months were the hardest of my life, but also the most transformative. The hate slowly died down as the internet moved on to newer scandals, but the damage to my online presence was permanent. Garden Goddess was dead, and Marina had to figure out who she was without the digital mask she'd been hiding behind. I lost the sponsorship income, but I gained something more valuable: the courage to be authentic. I started a new Instagram account under my real name, posting simple pictures of my actual gardening projects with honest captions about the struggles and successes of coaxing life from difficult situations. Julie supported me through it all, even when it meant social ostracism from her old circle. She resigned from 2 charity boards rather than step away from our relationship. And when the country club revoked her membership, she just shrugged and said she'd never liked golf anyway. "Don't you regret it?" I asked one evening as we worked together in the greenhouse, repotting seedlings I'd started from heirloom tomato seeds my mother had given me. "Which part? All of it? Losing your friends, your family's approval, your social standing, all for someone who lied to you?" She set down her trowel and looked at me seriously. "Marina, before you came into my life, I was lonely in a house, full of beautiful things. I had acquaintances, not friends. I had a schedule, not a purpose. You didn't just transform my gardens, you transformed me." She was right, though I was still learning to believe it. The woman I'd become bore little. Resemblance to either Marina the Desperate Liar or Garden Goddess -- digital -- fantasy. This new version was somewhere in between, confident enough to share her knowledge, vulnerable enough to admit her mistakes, real enough to build something lasting. My legitimate gardening business started small, a few neighbors who'd seen my work at the estate, then word-of-mouth referrals from people who appreciated honest expertise over manufactured mystique. I specialized in sustainable food gardens and healing spaces, the dreams I'd abandoned in favor of more immediately profitable lies. Mom's surgery was successful, her recovery slow but steady. She adored Julie, of course, and took credit for teaching me the plant knowledge that had ultimately brought us together. "I told you those seeds would grow," she said with a knowing smile. "I just didn't know what beautiful things would bloom from them." 1 year after the scandal that destroyed Garden Goddess, I stood in Julie's rose garden preparing for the most important photo shoot of my life. Not for Instagram, not for sponsors, not for strangers who wanted to buy a fantasy. For us. Julie emerged from the house wearing a simple white dress that made her look like something from a fairy tale. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and she carried a bouquet of flowers we'd grown together, roses from her grandmother's garden, lavender I'd planted along the walkway, herbs that had started as seeds in mason jars on my fire escape. "Ready?" asked the photographer, a friend of Julie's who specialized in intimate ceremonies. I nodded, though my hands were shaking. Not from fear this time, but from joy so intense it felt like I might explode with it. The ceremony was small, just us, the photographer, my mother, and Julie's friend Sarah, who'd stood by her through everything. We'd written our own vows, promising to tend to each other with the same care we gave our gardens, to nurture growth, even in difficult seasons, to choose truth over comfortable lies. "You planted yourself in my life," Julie said, echoing words she'd spoken months earlier. and now you're never leaving. My response came straight from my heart. Sometimes the most beautiful things grow from desperate soil and the most unexpected. Love stories begin with a lie, but they're built on truth. When we kissed, rose petals fell around us like confetti, and I thought about the strange journey that had brought us to this moment. From fake goddess to real woman, from digital fantasy to authentic love, from lies that saved my mother's life to truth that saved my soul. The internet had moved on as it always does. Garden Goddess was forgotten, archived in the digital graveyard of expired influencers and discredited content creators. But Marina Flores, the real one, was just beginning to bloom. 5 years later, I'm telling this story to a group of young women at a community center in Queens, part of a workshop on digital literacy and authentic entrepreneurship. They listen with wide eyes as I describe the heights of my fake success and the devastation of my public fall. "So don't become an influencer?" asks one girl, maybe 16, with purple hair and skeptical eyes. "No," I say, laughing. "Just be yourself while you do it." The internet needs more real stories, not fewer fake ones. My business has grown beyond anything I imagined possible. Marina Flores Gardens specializes in therapy gardens for hospitals, community food forests in underserved neighborhoods, and teaching sustainable growing techniques to anyone who wants to learn. I've been featured in real magazines not for my looks or my lifestyle, but for my expertise and my mission. Julie and I live in a restored farmhouse outside the city with acres of garden space where we grow everything from heirloom vegetables to cutting flowers. She left the charity world to become a landscape architect, the career she dreamed of before societal expectations pushed her toward marriage and committee work. Mom lives in the cottage on our property, still saving seeds in mason jars, still believing in the power of small things to grow into something beautiful. She jokes that she raised a daughter who could make anything bloom, even love that started with deception. The teenage girls file out after the workshop, chattering about authentic content and sustainable careers. One lingers behind a quiet girl with calloused hands who reminds me of myself at that age. "What if you're not good at being yourself?" she asks. "What if yourself isn't interesting enough?" I think about Garden Goddess, that carefully constructed fantasy who felt more real than reality for a while. I think about the lies that saved my mother and the truth that saved my soul. "Then you find out who you really are," I tell her. "Not who you think people want you to be, not who society says you should be, but who you are when no one's watching. That person? She's always interesting enough." The girl nods and heads for the door, then turns back one more time. "Do you ever miss her, Garden Goddess?" I consider the question seriously. Do I miss the validation, the easy money, the intoxicating power of being desired by strangers? Sometimes. But then I think about Julie's hands in mine. As we work in our greenhouse, about the children who've learned to grow food in our community gardens, about the cancer patients who found peace in the healing spaces we've designed. "No," I say finally. "She taught me what I was capable of, but she wasn't capable of love. Real love, the kind that grows slowly and lasts forever." The girl smiles and leaves, and I pack up my materials, thinking about the seeds I'm planting in every young mind that heard this story. Not seeds of caution or shame, but seeds of possibility, the understanding that our mistakes don't define us, our growth does. I drive home through streets lined with the early spring flowers Julie and I planted as part of the city beautification project, and I think about how different my life looks now compared to 5 years ago. No Instagram fame, no viral posts, no strangers telling me I'm perfect. Just real work that matters, real love that sustains, and real growth that continues every day. When I pull into our driveway, Julie is in the garden as usual, training clematis to climb the arbor we built. together. She looks up when she hears the car, and her smile is better than any number of likes or hearts or fire emojis could ever be. "How did it go?" she asks, wrapping her arms around me. "Good, really good." I think some of them actually heard what I was trying to say, which was. I lean into her embrace, breathing in the scent of earth and flowers and home. That authenticity is the only thing worth growing. Everything else is just pretty lies that wither in the end. She kisses my forehead, and we stand there for a moment among the plants we've nurtured together, watching the sunset over gardens that exist not for cameras or followers or profit, but simply because beautiful things deserve to exist. That night, I post a picture on my real Instagram account, not posed or filtered or staged. Just Julie and me with dirt under our nails and genuine smiles on our faces, standing in front of a community garden that will feed 50 families. This summer, the caption reads, "Year 5 of choosing truth over easy lies, still growing." It gets 37 likes, and I couldn't be happier. Sometimes the most beautiful things grow from desperate soil, and the most unexpected love stories begin with a lie. But they're built on truth, nurtured by authenticity, and they bloom in their own perfect time. Just like everything else worth growing.